Thanks, Andy. So, guys, we're just going to jump straight into the content, really the sort of the main content of the webinar now, and go through what we believe are Office 365 and Endpoint Manager best practices. And like Andy mentioned, this is all based on our recommendations and that we recommend to customers who we work with on a one-off basis, but also it forms the standards for our managed services as well, and that's all in a document. It's quite a large document because it is a low-level design intended to give people enough information to actually go off and implement a lot of these policies just off reading that document effectively, and we'll be providing that to you after the webinar. So during this session, what we're going to cover is we're going to go through some Office 365 Tenant and Azure AD sort of security best practices and baseline measures that we think pretty much everyone should have in place. One of those is conditional access policies, and we're going to do a separate sort of section on that just to break them out a little bit more because they're quite detailed, but they are still one of the baseline measures. And then we're going to go into talk about Endpoint Manager and how that can help you with your security, but more specifically what we recommend you actually do with it, really, for both mobile devices and Windows devices. So Tenant security baseline measures is broken out into two parts, mainly because I think it might be more practical for people to take things away from this, to what they can do straight away and what they might need to put a little bit more planning and thought into. So first of all, we've got things that that I know are definitely quick wins, and that can be done with any license, so you don't need any additional license. So these are things that anybody, regardless of what license you have, can go away and do reasonably quickly. So first thing we'd say is ensure that you've got MFA and audio administrator accounts. Maybe it's quite obvious or basic to some people on the call, but usually the most basic fundamental things are the ones that get you out of the most trouble. So we recommend going, if you haven't enable MFA and all your admin accounts. Off the back of that, ensure that you've got a break glass accounts or multiple break glass accounts that are excluded from MFA but have complex usernames and complex passwords that you use only in the event that either your multi-factor or your second method of authentication isn't available based on one of your main accounts, so you don't get locked out of your tenant. More important for conditional access, which we'll come to later. Password policy: if you're syncing from Azure AD Connect, if you're syncing from Active Directory using Azure AD Connect, ensure you've got a password policy in place in terms of a complexity that you think is suitable for your business, and make sure that's in place either on premises if you're synchronizing or in the cloud directly if not. Another one is to restrict how you invite guests, or restrict who can invite guests into your organization. So by default, anybody can invite guests into your tenant in your organization, and obviously one is most people won't need the ability to do that and will never use it, so it's a case of why not just restrict that sort of the size of that attack surface, really, if you can, and sort of make it a bit more like, so create a group, for example, and configure the tenant to only allow people in that group to invite guests. At least you've got control, then you know who it is. It might be a reasonable amount of people because your business might need that, but at least it's not just everyone by default. And obviously that restricts who can get into your tenant and who can invite them. We won't go into the details of what they are too much in this call. I think they're quite sort of well known in the industry, but make sure that you've got DMARC and your DKIM and your SPF configured correctly. You know, they'll increase your email security vastly and very quickly as well. Another one which people might not be aware of is that by default, Azure Active Directory more specifically allows users to integrate third-party SaaS applications to Office 365. And a lot of the time people think that that's being used for single sign-on, which it is, and which is a benefit both security and convenience wise. So it might be that people are using things like Dropbox, or we use things like Lucidchart and Draw.io, different sort of online applications that allow you to log in with Office 365. But the danger is with these third-party apps is that they're not just using single sign-on. They also, because they use the OAuth protocol, they also have access to your potentially to your OneDrive and to your users' mailboxes, that sort of stuff. So at an absolute minimum, configure it so that it requires consent from an admin, so someone can go in, just click single sign on with a particular app but it'll go to an admin for them to review it and approve it first, or just completely restrict it so that only admins can enable third-party app integration. So that's something that we definitely recommend doing, because that you haven't got no control of that out the box. And then the final one on the sort of quick wins that you can do with any license is to review your SharePoint and OneDrive external settings. The amount of sort of customers we've dealt with where their SharePoint and OneDrive external settings is basically set to anybody can share with anybody for both of those applications. I'd say it's probably the majority of them are set like that, that we sort of encounter, and I wouldn't recommend that really as a default setting for anyone. So I've got I'd recommend going in and sorting that very quickly if you can, because we've got a demo just after this quickly. It literally takes about 60 seconds to show you where to go in and change those settings. So I'll come to that shortly. The sort of other, what we still think are baseline measures that we think of, we do for all of our managed service customers, but they do require additional licensing. These other settings really are implementing tenant branding. So make sure that your company logo is on your tenant branding screen, so that when people log into your tenant, they see your company logo, they recognize the tenant, and just helps people get a bit of an expectation of what to see when they log in, and then by default to know what doesn't look normal. If they potentially add a phishing link sent to them and ask them to log into a tenant that isn't branded, it doesn't feel right, just helps with that sort of recognition. Restrict who can join devices to Azure AD. Again, by default, anybody can join any device to Azure AD. And yeah, you want to restrict that. It's to make sure that only maybe admins or only members of a particular group can actually join devices to Azure AD. Implement self-service password reset if you've got a P1 plan or a plan that includes P1. It's slightly more secure. It also makes makes things more convenient for your users and for your IT support teams, where they can reset their Active Directory or Azure Active Directory password via Office 365, basically by just adding a couple of extra methods of authentication. And then conditional access as well, which I'll touch on further, but that's something again what we think is an absolute baseline that you must have in place really if you want your tenant to be secured. And we'll go into that in more detail, but effectively, as a sort of summary of what conditional access is it's effectively you define policies at the tenant level that apply to every authentication that comes into your tenant, and it will review those authentication attempts and using the conditions you set, determine whether it's going to allow them or not effectively, and it'll review those conditions. So I'll come to that shortly in a lot more detail. So just as I mentioned earlier, I just want to quickly show anyone who doesn't know where to set the SharePoint and OneDrive external settings, because I think it's something that you should go in and take a look at and check your tenant straight away. So I'm just going to show you now. If you go into the 365 admin portal, and on the left hand side, you just click on SharePoint, and then just expand the policies section on the left, and then go to sharing, and then these are the settings in here. So this is basically what default is, most permissive, so anyone can share with anybody. So going here, the settings are very self-explanatory to be fair, but there's some extra ones there. You can limit by domain that you want to be able to allow users to share with. Only users in a certain group can share externally there if you tick that second box. So yeah, that's just where it is, just quickly, so you can go in and check those settings.